I think that still a lot of people in the military are looking at it as a job, granted a very crappy job, but a job nonetheless during a recession. There's a lot of folks who haven't developed a political analysis of the wars. It still to them just seems like their bread and butter.
So I want to tell you my personal story, a little bit of that, and my background. And then I would like to put this into a bigger context of a collapsing society in the United States, of a military empire that's run amok, that controls almost every facet and every institution in American culture, political culture, economic society, and so forth. And also, as I just got done speaking with Peter Boyle from Green Left, about the ecological devastation, patriarchy, the prison industrial complex, sexism and racism, homophobia, and all of the lunacy that's inherent to this culture. When people ask me why I joined the Marine Corps, it's not really a simple answer. But I do like to remind folks that in the United States, there's nothing out of the ordinary about joining the armed forces. It's promoted, glorified, all the mythologies about fighting war, what it means to be a big, tough guy, big, tough male in this society. You know, being a badass, you go pick up a gun and you go kill people. You know, you treat women like shit. You treat other races and other ethnicities like shit. This is part of American ideology and American culture growing up. I grew up playing Army with my brother. You know, I was shooting guns, shotguns, pistols, and AK-47s by the time I was 12 years old. Everybody in America has guns. It's part of the culture. It's part of what people do. They play the video games nonstop. James Bond wore this, Navy SEALs this, and watched all the movies. You know, all the same Hollywood movies that a lot of middle American kids watch and glorify. Going to war, special forces, jumping out of airplanes, shooting weapons, blowing stuff up, womanizing, taking drugs, that's all glorified. It's all part of the cultural ideology. That's what American society is all about. So it was no surprise or big thing for me to join the Marine Corps.
I decided against my father's wishes to go into the military as a medic in August of '97. We got into Iraq in November of '04, and I was there until November of '05. I served as a medic with Troop F, 2nd Squadron, 278th Regimental Combat Team.
My name is Mike Preisner. I joined the Army, left for basic training on my 18th birthday in June of 2001. I was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, and in March of 2003, I was attached to the 173rd Airborne Brigade and deployed to northern Iraq.
My name is Kelly Doherty. I served for 8 years in the Colorado Army National Guard. I was enlisted as a medic and later deployed twice, once to the Balkans and once to Iraq as military police. When my unit, the 220th Military Police Company from the Colorado Army National Guard, got orders to deploy to Iraq, I was actually serving in a headquarters detachment as a medic and was involuntarily transferred to the military police company to be deployed to first Kuwait and then later to Iraq.
You served 2 tours of duty in Iraq?
That's correct.
When did you enlist and when did you go to Iraq?
I enlisted shortly after I graduated high school in 2005.
In Wisconsin?
Yes. And in 2006, I went to Iraq for my first time, and we were extended to stay for the surge, and then I went again in 2008.
I joined the Army in 1967, in February of 1967, believing it was my patriotic duty that a guy ought to pay back to the country, you know, for the privilege of living here. And I still believe that, actually. I just have redefined who I think my debt is owed to, and I figure that now I fight for the cause of humanity rather than for, you know, an oil baron or some asshole up in Washington, D.C.
I joined the military in 1995 as an infantryman. and I deployed to the Middle East in March of '03. First to Jordan and then to Iraq in April of that same year.
When I was 19, I saw this National Guard commercial where this National Guardsman is driving a tank, and the tank jumps over a berm. And when I enlisted, I went into tanks, and I realized that if you did that with a tank, the tank would break. You see this on the commercial, and then at the end of the commercial, it says you could still be home in time for dinner, and they show the guy eating dinner with his family. So, but you didn't really think of that when you sent him to Iraq. He's not going to be home in time for dinner. Someone won't come home at all.
So I joined the Army as an officer because my friendly recruiter told me I could be in the Adjutant General's Corps. And I'd go to embassy parties in Washington, D.C. for 4 years, and that sounded like fun. That was obviously a lie.
So I'll start off by telling you a little bit about myself and when I was recruited, which was out of Denver, Colorado when I was in high school. I was just your average student. I came from a working class family who was in no way going to be able to pay for an education for me. And although I did okay in school, I never really applied myself enough to get the kind of grades that would require that would deserve or merit me any kind of scholarship or other way to pay for school. On top of this, I kind of had a burning need to get out and see some more of the world, which I'm sure a lot of different people could have had at the time and still do. And so I was pretty much a prime candidate for military recruitment, and it didn't take but a quick checkup online and putting my email address in before I was getting bombarded with calls from all the different services. And finally one night it was the Marine Corps who finally showed up at my house in their dress blues, looking fancy, looking professional, talking to my family. And I was 17 years old, and I was in the summer between my junior year in high school and my senior year, and that was pretty much all it took. Now, again, going along with what the film Before You Enlist has said, I was shown and partook in the kind of lies that were gonna plague the rest of my entire enlistment from the very beginning. The first thing that I was told was that I didn't have to sign the typical 8-year contract, which is 4 years active, 4 years inactive. I was told that because of the job choice that I signed up for, which is intelligence, required me to do a 5-year contract active duty, and then which I would do 3 years inactive. Now you'll imagine my surprise when I showed up to intel school and I was the only one with a 5-year contract. But it was another kind of quota that had to be met. Recruiters get points in a sense of a system, whereas if they can get people to sign up for 5 years, such as myself, who was young and enthusiastic about joining, it was easy for them to convince me of something like this. But the lies didn't stop there. I was told when I signed up and then when I started helping out that any kind of drug use, or whether it be prescription or recreational, that I had been part of, or anyone that had come into that office should be lied about. That you shouldn't say these things when you're signing up, because it's going to hurt your chances of being able to actually go to boot camp. And they talked a lot about this famous moment of truth in which you get to boot camp and you have to stand up and under penalties of jail and massive fines state whether everything that you said so far is true. And they said, you know what, if anybody stands up at that moment of truth, you're not doing what you should be doing.
Now the recruiting practices that I see are just disgusting. You know, there's a recruiting station not too far from my house. It's on Fordham Road. Constantly you see they have like a Hummer, like the H3 parked out front, playing like reggaeton because there's a large Latino population here, or playing hip-hop so they could get the kids to come over to the H3 so they could talk to them. It's really gross, the recruiting practices, and children fall right into it because it's natural. You know, you're being trained, you're being indoctrinated before you even realize, you know, what it is. As a child, especially a young male, you know, you have a lot of aggression and you use different things to focus it. You know, you play video games where you shoot people and you learn about weapon systems. When I was 15, 16 years old, you could ask me about the M16 and I could tell you so many different things about it, just that I learned off of playing video games, you know. And the military uses that to their advantage, man. And a post-September 11th world, you know, using the military as a step stool to get a college education is just, I mean, it's suicide. But you'll still have some people who will use it because they really feel like they don't have many other options.
I joined the military when I was 18 after high school in Auburn, Alabama. I had faced quite a lot of trouble while I was still a juvenile there in Alabama with various, I was charged with possession of marijuana one time for like a half of a gram. You know, this led to an enormous unraveling of my family dynamic, which ultimately wound me up homeless the day after I graduated high school. And I moved into the woods, literally in a tent. I was kind of pursuing this whole Henry David Thoreau transcendentalist type experience for myself. And I was selling psychedelic mushrooms to pay the bills. Well, you don't really have so many bills when you live in a tent in the woods.
Right. Enough that psychedelic mushrooms will cover it.
Right. Vienna sausages don't pay for themselves.
Okay.
So anyway, I got set up by my father and my stepbrother. Never actually formally charged, just kind of given sort of the good old boy runaround by the cops in the Justice Department, and pretty much they threatened to charge me and put me away for, you know, half of my life, or I could join the military.
I've
exactly.
heard this one before.
So,
I think a few of us out there have heard this one.
Right.
Okay.
It's modern day press ganging is what it is.
Yeah.
It's the British Navy used to have this policy of charging citizens with ridiculous crimes and then forcing them to join the military, or even picking up drunks, putting them on ships, and then when they wake up, they, okay, well, you've been charged with drunkenness and your sentence.
Were you already convinced that you were going to go to Iraq, or back then it was probably Iraq?
Well, the war in Iraq hadn't even started at that point. That was 2002. We were already in Afghanistan, but it seemed to me as an 18-year-old that we would catch bin Laden soon. And that the U.S. would be out of Afghanistan and back to being, you know, a good country, which, you know, as much problems as I had personally experienced with it at that point, I hadn't developed a larger political analysis. So I was rather green. I knew that the Army wasn't for me, but I knew that even if I managed to get out of this situation, I'd still be in a tent. I would still not have so many prospects. So I joined with the idea of getting education, you know, learning to be a journalist, which is what my job was in the military, trying to travel the world, which I managed to do in a sense. I was in Japan and Germany, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and a number of other places. However, it wasn't until 2008 that the military ordered me to Iraq, and this was after I'd already been discharged from active duty. They tried to call me back and send me for a year to Iraq. And at this point, I was already in Brooklyn, New York. I was already going to Brooklyn College. I, in fact, just had begun school. And I was starting to develop a very critical analysis of what I had experienced up to that point, not just regarding the war, but regarding the military as an institution.
I joined the Army to kill people. I signed up as a forward observer. My job was to go out and basically annihilate the enemy when we received contact. I was 19 years old when I was deployed to Iraq, and I spent the first 8 months in Sadr City. The people there hate us, and the reason why is because when we went there, we promised them freedom and we promised them help. We promised to get them clean water, to get them food, to get them jobs. But all that I saw over there now, all that I saw over there in 2005 and all that there is now is 2 to 4 hours of electricity a day, sewage that leaks into their fresh water system, if you want to call it fresh, a water treatment plant which hasn't been finished. It was barely even worked on the entire year that I was set in Iraq. When I came home from Iraq, all I did was drink. I'm a severe alcoholic, and so was just about everybody who lived in the barracks with me. We used to go out every Friday, Saturday night, and I would have a 1.75 liter bottle of vodka, and I'd just about finish it. and I blacked out every time. That was my goal. I wanted to black out. I was self-medicating because we were told that if we were to seek mental health, we would be locked away and that our careers would not advance. If I admitted that I had severe chronic depression, if I thought I had PTSD or anything like that, my career could have been ruined. The only thing that I had to look forward to was getting out of the military and going to college. I had learned my lesson the hard way, that I should have gone to college, should have got an education, and should never have seen the ugly face of war.
I was, 3 or 4 years older and a lot whiter than most of the people I was in basic training with. And as I got to talking to folks and heard their stories, most of them didn't join. The ones that joined, most of them, had been given choice. You can join the Army or you can go to jail. And, that was not a good choice, There were also, most of the kids were drafted. The vast majority of the folks I was with were African American, Chicanos, not an insignificant number of white folks, and a number of the white folks had joined and were going to be going into some specialty field or becoming officers, And I realized earlier on that just, even if I did this 4 years of embassy parties, this was part of a system that I didn't want to have anything to do with. But I was in the Army now, so what the hell? And in shock, because some of y'all have been in the Army. I mean, it's pretty, the purpose of the first 3 or 4 months is to beat you down, to make you a good soldier, which means, I'm going to lose all my humanity. I'm going to follow orders. I'm going to do what you tell me to, and that means killing people.
When I first went to boot camp, my initial perception was that of, I'm sure, everyone else. It was a radical change in which they were breaking us down. They needed to break down everything that we were before to the point where we were even considered less than human. We weren't even a civilian. We definitely weren't a Marine at that point. But we were less than human, and it was their job to build us back up in the most robotic fashion in order to mold us and turn us into the robots in order to do the bidding that they needed. And that involved brutality that I had never seen before. And this was just in boot camp. This was before the war. This was in 2003 when I joined. And the brutality that I had seen in boot camp, I hadn't even seen in the movies. There was times when I remember drill instructors throwing full canteens of water and hitting a recruit in the head, splitting his head wide open, and that drill instructor was given about a 2-week vacation, and then he was back with us the very next cycle that we were partaking in. There was the reaction from the recruits while they were in was also evident. You saw not only the hardship and what everybody had to deal with around you, but also with the people that had been in boot camp for a while, which we had considered been recycled. And people that, for instance, may have gotten injured or couldn't pass a certain stage. There's no kicking you out. They just keep you there. And you go back into the platoon behind you and you keep going. And seeing some of these people and their perspective after having been there for months on end, started to take a toll on other recruits, people that have been affected by it even more and were taking to the experience even harsher. While I was in, there were 2 suicide attempts within my own platoon. One of them was a close friend of mine who came out of Colorado, another individual who I helped join. He ended up, he slit his wrist one night, survived, and went home. The next time I had been promoted to guide of my platoon. And in the middle of the night, I was woken up because a second recruit, another one of my friends who I had met while I was there, had slit his wrist and was in the bathroom and almost died. But the recruiters were able to patch him up, and he didn't even leave boot camp. We saw him continue, and he just got recycled like some of those other, just like if he had a normal injury to his leg or something. The most traumatic time that I remembered was when we actually got to the rifle range and someone who was already had it in their head that was the only way out turned the rifle on themselves in the middle of the rifle range. And in front of everyone, and it was barely a break. It was barely a break in the training before we were right back out there the next day on the rifle range doing the same thing as if nothing had happened.